George Washington stands at the center of the American founding, not as a visionary writer or fiery orator, but as a figure of restraint, endurance, and authority earned over time. He did not seek revolution, power, or lasting fame, yet he became indispensable to all three. His leadership shaped the outcome of the American War of Independence and set enduring precedents for political power in the new United States. Washington's importance lies not only in what he achieved, but in what he refused to become. His choices established limits on authority at a moment when those limits were fragile and uncertain. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia. He was born into a moderately prosperous planter family within the British colonial system. His father, Augustine Washington, owned land and enslaved laborers, but the family did not belong to the highest tier of Virginia's elite. When Washington was 11 years old, his father died, leaving the family divided across several households and limiting George's access to formal education. Washington's upbringing was shaped by the rigid social hierarchy of colonial Virginia. Land ownership, honor, and reputation defined success. Unlike many of his future peers, Washington did not attend college. Instead, he developed practical skills in mathematics, surveying, and land management. As a teenager, he worked as a surveyor in the Virginia frontier, gaining first-hand knowledge of the terrain beyond settled colonies. This experience exposed him to hardship, conflict, and the expanding ambitions of the British Empire. Washington was ambitious and deeply conscious of status. He carefully cultivated manners, discipline, and self-control. Early exposure to military culture, particularly through the Fairfax family, introduced him to imperial politics and command structures. These influences formed a young man who valued order, hierarchy, and duty above abstract ideology. Washington's early military career began during the struggle between Britain and France for control of North America. In 1754, he was commissioned as a lieutenant colonel in the Virginia militia. His early service during the French and Indian War was marked by both failure and resilience. He gained notoriety after surviving a disastrous British defeat under General Edward Braddock, where Washington helped organize a retreat under fire. Although he never received a commission in the British regular army, Washington emerged with valuable experience in logistics, leadership, and frontier warfare. He also developed resentment toward British military hierarchy, which often dismissed colonial officers as inferior. After the war, Washington returned to civilian life, married Martha Custis, and became one of the wealthiest landowners in Virginia. As tensions grew between Britain and its American colonies, Washington became increasingly involved in colonial resistance. He served in the Virginia House of Burgesses and supported economic protests against British taxation. Despite his growing opposition to imperial policy, Washington initially hoped for reconciliation. His shift toward independence was gradual, shaped by political exclusion and the use of military force against colonial dissent. Washington's most consequential role began in 1775, when the Second Continental Congress appointed him commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. His selection reflected political necessity as much as military confidence. As a Virginian, Washington helped unify northern and southern colonies. He accepted the command without salary, reinforcing his image as a servant of the cause rather than a seeker of power. The Continental Army was poorly trained, underfunded, and divided by regional loyalties. Washington faced the challenge of holding together a force that often lacked supplies, discipline, and consistent support from civilian authorities. He understood that survival mattered more than decisive victory. Avoiding destruction of his army became his central strategy. Washington's leadership during the war was defined by perseverance. Early defeats in New York nearly destroyed the revolutionary cause. Yet Washington adapted, withdrawing strategically and striking opportunistically. His crossing of the Delaware River in December 1776 led to a surprise victory at Trenton, restoring morale at a critical moment. Throughout the war, Washington balanced military necessity with political reality. He managed relationships with Congress, foreign allies, and rival generals. He endured criticism, conspiracies, and periods of near mutiny within his ranks. His willingness to endure hardship, alongside his soldiers, strengthened loyalty and legitimacy. The alliance with France proved decisive. Washington coordinated closely with French commanders, culminating in the Siege of Yorktown in 1781. The British surrender there effectively ended major combat operations. Washington resisted calls to seize political power after the war. Instead, he resigned his commission in 1783, an act that shocked observers across Europe. It established civilian control of the military as a foundational principle. After the war, the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation became apparent. Washington initially retired to Mount Vernon, but unrest such as Shays' rebellion convinced him that stronger national governance was necessary. He presided over the Constitutional Convention in 1787, lending legitimacy to its proceedings. Although he spoke rarely, his presence shaped debate and compromise. In 1789, Washington was unanimously elected the first president of the United States. His presidency created the framework for the executive branch. He formed a cabinet, enforced federal law, and navigated competing visions of the nation's future. He supported the establishment of a national bank and federal authority, while remaining cautious about concentrated power. Washington's handling of the Whiskey Rebellion demonstrated the federal government's ability to enforce its laws. At the same time, he emphasized restraint and legality. He voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms, rejecting the possibility of lifelong rule. This decision established a precedent that endured for more than a century. Washington's life and leadership were marked by contradictions. He was a champion of liberty who owned enslaved people for most of his life. His wealth and status depended on a system that denied freedom to others. While he expressed private unease with slavery and eventually provided for emancipation in his will, he did not publicly challenge the institution during his lifetime. Politically, Washington struggled to remain above faction. His presidency coincided with the emergence of organized political parties. Conflicts between figures such as Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson divided the government. Washington favored unity, but often aligned with Federalist policies, fueling opposition and criticism. Foreign policy presented another challenge. Revolutionary France and Great Britain both sought American support. Washington insisted on neutrality, believing the young republic could not survive foreign entanglements. His neutrality proclamation angered many, but kept the nation out of war during its fragile early years. Washington also faced personal attacks and public scrutiny. Newspapers criticized his policies and character. He found partisan conflict deeply distressing, yet he continued to govern with restraint and dignity. After leaving the presidency in 1797, Washington returned permanently to Mount Vernon. He focused on agricultural experimentation, estate management, and correspondence. Despite his desire for privacy, he remained a symbol of national unity. In December 1799, Washington fell ill after exposure to severe weather. His condition worsened rapidly. He died on December 14, 1799, at the age of 67. News of his death spread quickly. Across the United States and abroad, public mourning reflected recognition of his singular role in the nation's creation. Washington's death marked the end of a generation that had forged independence through personal sacrifice and shared risk. George Washington's legacy rests on the power he exercised and the power he surrendered. He shaped military victory, constitutional government, and executive restraint. His actions created norms that stabilized a fragile republic. Later leaders inherited institutions defined by his choices. Washington became a symbol of national identity, invoked across political divisions. His image represents authority grounded in duty rather than ambition. While his life reflects the inequalities of his time, his leadership helped establish a system capable of reform and endurance. The United States did not emerge fully formed. It survived because figures like Washington understood the danger of unchecked power. His greatest contribution was not conquest or command, but the example of leadership willing to step aside. That was today's GOAT. Do you agree with our pick? Like the video if you do, or drop your GOAT in the comments. Tell us which country should be next, and subscribe for more GOATs of the world.